Hello everyone, it's me Clayton. I just finished watching Renfield, starring Nicholas Hoult, Awkwafina, and Nicolas Cage. Now, when it comes to the Universal monster films, most of them tend to lean more into horror than when it comes to almost any kind of genre imaginable. But in this horror comedy that had its story written by Robert Kirkman, and with the directing talents of Chris McKay, the same guy who did the Lego Batman movie, we get an R-rated, blood-soaked comedy about Renfield trying to get out of his toxic relationship with the Lord of Death. Let's get to the story, shall we? The story opens in a pretty similar fashion to the 1931 Dracula film that starred Bela Lugosi, just with Nicolas Cage taking the role of Dracula. Dracula recruits Renfield, played by Nicholas Hoult, to be his familiar as he's planning on taking over the world so he can have an endless supply of blood to maintain his immortality. But Renfield, acting as his assistant, realizes that Dracula basically just sees him as a tool, and he seeks to get out of the toxic relationship with his boss. In modern-day New Orleans, where there's a crime family called the Lobo family that's going around that are trying to be apprehended by this police officer named Rebecca, played by Awkwafina, and Nicholas Hoult's Renfield gets involved in that, while he also tries to sever ties with Dracula and finally gain his freedom, which he hasn't had in over 90 years. But that's all I'll say about the story. To me, it's a good story locked in a bit of a mediocre package. What I mean by that is that the central idea of Renfield regaining his freedom over his master, Dracula, is a genuinely good idea, and I'm glad that there's a film about it because it does offer a sense of catharsis not only for him, but I think for anybody who's ever been in a toxic, controlling relationship. Whether it be with a romantic partner or a boss or any person that you open your heart to that ends up treating you like garbage. It's a genuinely good idea for a story, and both Nicholas Hoult and Nick Cage do a really good job as both Renfield and Dracula. Especially since they both look a lot like the actors who played Renfield and Dracula in the 1931 movie. But it's a story that gets wrapped up in a lot of other cliches to the point where it feels like those other subplots were really only there to pad out the story to a 90-minute feature length, or 93 minutes in this case. Like, they had a good basis for a story that would really only take around 40 to 50 minutes, but they needed to pad it out to a full-on movie in order to get it made. That being said, Awkwafina as Rebecca is not bad. She's genuinely likable, and I do like most of her humor as her character. But it just feels like she belongs in a completely different movie in this case. And the same goes for the Lobo crime family, even if Ted Lobo, played by Ben Schwartz, is pretty hilarious, since he gets to really let out all his cuss words in an R-rated movie for once. Though the R rating was mostly probably for the blood, considering there are gallons of blood in almost every single action scene. And I will say those are probably when the film is at its most entertaining, because it's as over the top as you'd expect from a movie where your main character eats bugs in order to gain superpowers. Granted, a lot of the blood is digital, but at the same time there's so much of it, and it's done with so much carnage, with torn limbs and people being impaled and people's necks being bitten, to the point where you don't really care about some of the effects not looking particularly practical. For some of them, they really couldn't be practical at all. I just wish that the story and some of the side characters were better or more interesting, and they didn't feel like they were just there to pad out an initially good idea. Because, like I said, the central idea is really good, Nicholas Hoult and Nick Cage are really good, and when you get to the parts of Robert Kirkman's story that generally feel like some of his better works, like Walking Dead or Invincible, the film really shines. But you have to get through some other parts that don't shine nearly as much, and that's why I'm going to give this film a 7 out of 10. See you next time.